The fifth most important handgun characteristic to consider when selecting a handgun for self-defense is magazine capacity. How much ammunition that weapon can hold. Now, the next most important characteristic to evaluate when we're looking at handguns is its magazine capacity or its ammunition capacity. Now, we mentioned this a little bit in the chapter on handgun height because typically the taller the handgun, the more ammunition that handgun is going to be able to hold because in a semi-automatic pistol, the ammunition is stored in the handle. However, it's worth mentioning again because ammunition capacity is a very important characteristic for a self-defense handgun for reasons we're about to talk about, and especially it's worth mentioning again because as you're about to see, not necessarily does the longer the handgun's handle mean that it's going to have a greater ammunition capacity. If you go through the Armed American's Complete Concealed Carry Guide to Effective Self-Defense, you'll learn that because of the dynamics of how gunfights play out, gunfights are almost never textbook situations where you'll pull your gun out, steady it while closing one eye and lining up your sights on the bad guy, and then squeezing the trigger. It's just never like that. Instead, you're often frantically pulling the trigger as fast as you possibly can, while vaguely aiming your handgun at your attacker or simply pointing it at your attacker. Now, in that 20-hour training program, we discuss a multitude of ways to overcome many of the effects that stress and adrenaline will have on the general population when they are in a gunfight. And you, or even me, if we're not ready and if we're not trained and prepared for that. And absolutely, there's no reason why you have to accept these disadvantages from the get-go. But in any case, the amount of ammunition that your handgun can hold is one of the most decisive factors of whether or not you're going to walk away unharmed or in any case victorious from a self-defense incident. Consider that in gunfights, trained and qualified police officers miss often up to 77% of the shots they fire. This is not because police officers are terrible shots. It's because police officers are human beings. Well, what are you? You're a human being as well. And so, sadly, and I hate to make this sound like it's a game of spray and pray because it's not, but sadly, we have to assume that many of our shots are going to miss a target. And so when we're going into a self-defense situation, we need to give ourselves the highest probability of scoring good, solid, fight-stopping hits on target as possible. So what does that mean? The greater the ammunition capacity, the greater the odds are that we're actually going to hit our attacker in a self-defense situation. And so when selecting a gun, ammunition capacity is one of the most critical things to look out for. In other words, how many rounds of ammunition does this gun hold? Now, as we alluded to in the chapter on caliber, for most intents and purposes, the bigger the bullet that you're firing at your attacker, the better. That said, there is some diminishing returns here, especially considering this. The fact is, a 45 ACP cartridge is a lot bigger and a lot wider than a 9mm cartridge. Now that sounds great at first, but it does come with a couple important drawbacks. Unfortunately, one of these drawbacks is this. A lot of the 45 ACPs out there have what are known as single stack magazines. This means that the bullets effectively just sit on top of one another in the magazine in a vertical stack. Now, this is opposed to the configurations that nearly all self-defense handguns chambered in either 9mm or 40 caliber Smith & Wesson use, which we refer to as double stack magazines. As you can see, double stack magazines stagger the ammunition, which means you can fit nearly twice as many of them per magazine as you can in a single stack configuration. And so once again, we have to discuss balance. Is it better to have 6 or 7 big bullets or 12 or 16 slightly smaller bullets? Now that's a heck of a question. And I'm telling you, if you walk into a gun store or any group of gun enthusiasts claiming to have the perfect answer here of which answer is the best one to this question, you're not going to make many friends. For most people, this question is a matter of personal preference and it's a matter of opinion. And so how can you win an argument against opinions? You can't. That said, I believe in scientific data, and I think we can come up with a very reasonable expectation here. And so 4 reasons that we come up with in the Armed Americans Complete Concealed Carry Guide, which you'll see if you ever go through that course, I've come up with the number 10. Just by studying the types of self-defense situations we're most likely to find ourselves in, how many attackers we're likely to face, what those distances are, what the hit and miss ratios of people using handguns are, all these factors and a lot more combined have yielded to me the wisdom that we should make sure our self-defense handguns have at least 10 rounds in them, preferably 12. Sometimes between 10 and 12, those extra 2 rounds can be the difference between survival and not. But the biggest drop-off happens when you get below 10 rounds. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. There absolutely have been many gunfights where an armed citizen was successful in saving his life or the lives of his family because he fired 1 or 2 or 3 rounds. It does happen, absolutely. But again, studying all the gunfights that I studied during the assembly of the Complete Concealed Carry Guide, I came up with this rough benchmark. Now, sometimes this can be a simple matter of wisdom and ergonomics and using space efficiently. For example, I already mentioned that in single stack handguns, you're not going to get a very large ammunition capacity. This 1911 holds 7 rounds in the magazine plus 1 in the chamber for a total of 8 rounds. This Ruger LCP holds 6 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber for a total capacity of 6 plus 1 or 7 rounds. Neither of these handguns meets my recommended threshold for ammunition capacity. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got a full-size duty handgun, a Glock 17, that holds 17 rounds, coincidentally, in the magazine plus 1 for a total capacity of 18. Obviously, we would all be better served if we could carry these gigantic 33-round magazines. Then, I mean, that would be a lot of psychological comfort. But that just shows you how much of a matter of balance this is. You're not going to be able to walk around with a handgun that looks like this. It's just not going to be possible. So we're always balancing things here. At the subcompact size, we have 15 rounds in the magazine. Or I'm sorry, at the compact size, we have 15 rounds in the magazine plus 1 in the chamber for a total of 16. And then at the subcompact size, by default, this Glock 26 holds 10 when the magazine is flush with the bottom of the handle, but we can add a slight extension that adds 1 or even 2 extra rounds of capacity for a total capacity of 11 plus 1 or 12 plus 1. And so when it comes to me personally, I'm a firm believer that if there is a will, there is a way. For example, I'm not a very large frame person, which typically means that I'm going to have a difficult time concealing a handgun. But even still, my everyday carry gun is a Glock 17, the full-size duty handgun, which holds 17 rounds of 9mm ammunition in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. Now, that's not possible for most people, but again, this just illustrates that if there is a will, there is a way. And so carrying a subcompact that holds 10 plus 1, or 11 plus 1, or 12 plus 1, this should be possible. Again, if there's a will, there's a way. There's no reason why we have to carry a Tier 2 handgun that holds only 6 plus 1 rounds. Just remember, if you're already accepting the physical discomfort that comes with carrying a gun this size, you could well over double your effectiveness as a privately armed guardian if you moved up to a handgun like the Glock 26 and with the plus 2 extension, so you've got 12 plus 1 of a combat caliber rather than 6 plus 1 of something less, the 380 ACP. So keep that in mind. I'm not telling you what you have to carry. You can carry anything. I'd rather have a Ruger LCP than nothing, without a doubt. But that said, you're already going through a lot of physical and psychological discomfort to carry this weapon. It doesn't take that much more. You're certainly not doubling the difficulty when you step up to a weapon like this, but you are doubling your effectiveness. So you have a very, very good trade-off there. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind as we conclude this chapter are these general guidelines. In situations where you're attacked by one individual, given the typical miss rates and hit rates of privately armed citizens and police officers in deadly combat, 5 or 6 rounds may be enough. In situations where you're attacked by 2 individuals, you'll probably want 10 rounds or more. If there are 3 individuals or more, or if your attackers are very determined, you will probably want 15 rounds or more. And again, I've derived these general guidelines because given the statistical hit and miss ratios that we see and that we've recorded from real life incidents, you'll need to have at least 5 rounds on you per attacker in order to guarantee 1 or 2 good hits on that attacker's body. All right, that's it. You've reached the end of disc 1. What do you think so far? Powerful stuff. Take notes, make sure that you understand everything that we've talked about here on this disc, and then pop it out, put in disc 2 when you're ready, and let's continue the learning.